Welcome. This video lecture focuses on the rise of nation building in the Middle Ages. Today we're going to focus on four countries, the development of four: England, France, Spain, and Russia. We already know a lot about Russia because we've already studied it, so we just want to review, and then we're going to focus more on England, France, and Spain. Before we begin, I want to go over a couple key terms. First one is a nation. A nation is technically a group of people who share a common language, culture, religion, or ethnicity, and they feel loyalty to that shared trait. So an example of a nation would be Scotland. They identify not as British, but majorly, if you had a Scottish person, they say, I'm Scottish, because they have that common sense of heritage, that common sense of culture and ethnicity, and they feel loyalty to that idea. Now, a state is a political unit with a defined territory and a central government. So an example of that would be the United Kingdom. It is a state. It has defined territories of where it controls: England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, with a centralized government led by the Prime Minister, on the more day-to-day, but more ceremonially, you have the Queen. And finally, we have the idea of a nation-state. That's where you literally combine both a nation and a state. It's a group of people who are ruled by one central government, who share a common language, culture, religion, ethnicity, and heritage, who also feel that sense of loyalty to their nation. So we're going to see the rise of modern nation-states, particularly in England, France, and Spain, for example. But let's talk about Russia. As you already know, they are ruled for a couple hundred years by the Mongols through the Khanate of the Golden Horde. It is Ivan III, or Ivan the Great, who declares himself the first Tsar, and he does this by overthrowing Mongol rule, and he establishes centralized power. The church, and this would be the Eastern Orthodox Church, serves as a cultural unifier to help him do that. And then the other Ivan that you do need to know is Ivan IV, or Ivan the Terrible. He was largely responsible for establishing absolute rule and control of the czars over Russia that Russia is characterized as. And that's it for Russia. So, moving on to Spain. Spain for a long time was actually two kingdoms. You have the Kingdom of Aragon, the smaller kingdom, and you have the Kingdom of Castile. When they unite, that's where we get the idea of nation-state Spain. But for the longest time, they are the majority country on the Iberian Peninsula, and they're dominated by Spanish Muslims, the ones that we call Moors. Spain was predominantly taken over by the Umayyad Caliphate. By 750, the Moors were in Spain controlling it. And we have three Christian kingdoms: Portugal, Castile, and Aragon. The event where you really have the establishment of the nation-state of Spain is when the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon unite, and that is through the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella. The idea that you kick out the Moors, that event in Spanish history is known as the Reconquista. They make use of the Inquisition, a special church court, to root out non-believers, to root out Jews and Muslims, and they literally kick them out of the Iberian Peninsula. That event ends, Ferdinand and Isabella, that ends when in 1492 they conquer the city of Granada, and the Moors are now expelled from Spain. 1492 is also the date in history when Columbus set sail the ocean blue. Another important person in the development of Spain is Charles V. He was also I say HRE, and that stands for Holy Roman Emperor. So he not only ruled over Spain, but also the Holy Roman Empire, which is mainly mostly the countries today of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and most of Central Europe, essentially. He will greatly increase Spanish power and exploiting the New World, destroying the Inca and the Aztec empires in the Americas, and also using the gold and the silver deposits found there to make his nation, Spain, very, very wealthy. A further note about the Inquisition. This is a special church court that is set up to try heresy cases or cases of non-believers or fakers who really haven't actually changed their beliefs and devoted their lives to God and fully accepted Christianity. They're targeted against conversos who were once Jewish, but with the threat of being kicked out of Spain, where they were tolerated for several centuries by the Muslims. They now converted to Christianity, and the Inquisition was a case of where they tried to root out those non-believers. One of the activities today has you looking at and watching a video about the Inquisition, but mainly about the various torture techniques they would use to help force a confession. So they used questioning and some very, very brutal torture tactics to determine your innocence as well. All right, moving on to England. The development of England is going to first be settled by my two barbarian tribes, the Angles and the Saxons. And the first guy who's important is Alfred the Great. He's going to unite all of those Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, there's about 7 of them, into one unified nation with Alfred the Great. And he's pictured up here, up at the top, under England, under one kingdom. By the year 1042, the current king was Edward the Confessor. He becomes king, and he is pictured down there. Edward the Confessor was considered to be a very holy king. He's actually a saint in the Roman Catholic Church as well. However, there's a problem. Edward the Confessor dies in 1066, and he has no sons. So the question of who's going to be the new king is up for grabs, and this causes a lot of problems because there's 2 main contenders. And that leads us to the event of the Norman Conquest. So this is when you have 2 kings or 2 people fighting for power. And England is invaded because William, who's the Duke of Normandy, which is like northern France, think about where the Allied invasion took place in World War II in 1944. That's where William ruled. He says Edward the Confessor promised him the throne, and it is rightfully his. So he gathers a force and he invades England. He was a cousin of Edward, but the other rival is Harold Godwin's son. He was a prince. He claims that Edward the Confessor named him king on his deathbed, and Harold is actually crowned king officially. And because it takes time for messages to get back and forth, this is when William mounts his invasion. So Harold is king for less than a year until William gets his act together, builds his army, and sails across the English Channel. So the Norman Conquest. The most important and significant date in the development of the nation-state of England is in 1066, and this is the Battle of Hastings. This is where William wins a decisive victory against Harold Godwin's son, and William becomes the new King of England. When he takes over, William will establish a feudal system, which was something that was never done in England before. So this is a new idea he's bringing from France because the French are sophisticated. And the Normans who invade England become the lords, and of course William the Conqueror becomes king. And the whole Norman conquest is actually documented in a beautiful tapestry that's 240 feet long, embroidery of the Norman invasion. That's called the Bayeux Tapestry, and you're actually going to watch a video clip or read a description about it. According to the Bayeux Tapestry, Harold Godwin's son, I got a little arrow that moved up there, and he was shot and killed with an arrow to the eye, and that's shown in the Bayeux Tapestry as well. So this is where you want to pause and you can watch the animated video. There's also another Horrible Histories about Normanopoly you can watch. And then, if you like music videos, that's one reviewing William the Conqueror. You'll be able to click all these links, so you can pause here. Alright, so about William the Conqueror. The Norman conquest takes place in 1066, and when William comes to power, he says, well, what have I inherited? And so he establishes the Domesday Book. It's basically a census to figure out how many people live in his new country that he established, and what do they own. It's a count of the land, the people, and the wealth of England. The next king is, we've got, not in this particular order, but you have Henry II. Henry II is very important because he establishes the idea of common law, or the law for everyday use. And he reorganizes the judicial system, which established procedures that we still use today in our judicial courts. So things like how the actual system works, like you appeal up, rules for trial, clear verdicts, guilty, not guilty, that whole sort of thing. He also is famous for establishing Parliament, which is the legislative body that helps rule and guide the king throughout history, and now, today, controls most of the power. He also claimed the right to put the clergy or the priests on trial. And this is where he gets into trouble, because he had a problem with his Archbishop of Canterbury, a guy named Thomas Becket. He was always saying that Henry II was wrong and that the Pope had the authority. And so one day Henry II says, won't someone, release me from this curse of an archbishop? Well, 4 knights took that literally, and they actually killed Thomas of Becket inside his own cathedral at Canterbury. Those 4 knights say that they were ordered by Henry. Henry is excommunicated for a short time by the Pope until he begs for forgiveness and does the appropriate penance. We're almost done with England. We have John, King John, the only John in the history of the English kings, sometimes called Lackland. And that's because he was the 3rd son, and so he didn't inherit anything. He was, the 4th son to King Henry II, and he is forced, most importantly, to sign the Magna Carta, and he signs this in 1215. This is very, very important because it's the first document in all of history that actually says and limits the authority of what a king can and cannot do. It's the first one that places King John within the scopes of law. Before this, like Hammurabi, Justinian, could make all these law codes, but they could just ignore them because they're above the law. The Magna Carta is the first one that says, no, the king is still held liable and responsible for obeying the laws of the land that he signs into, authority. The other thing is, and this is what this is what the nobles really, really wanted, is that the king must have the approval of the legislature, or really parliament, in order to collect taxes. It also guarantees your trial right to a trial by jury and due process of law. So you have to go through the proper steps in order to convict someone. You have to have evidence, for example. All right, we're going to do France in another PowerPoint, and also the 100 Years' War. Bye, guys.